All right, we are chapter 7, so let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. Tonight, as we get ready to celebrate June 19th, I wanted to focus on the 12 gates of the Holy City, New Jerusalem, and the symbolism of those gates. So I'm going to start with just the reading of the part about the gates. This is from Revelation 21. And the angel carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain and showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her light was like a most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. Also, she had a great and high wall with 12 gates and 12 angels at the gates, and names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, and 3 gates on the west. The 12 gates were 12 pearls. Each individual gate was of 1 pearl. Its gates shall not be shut at all by day. So, first of all, let's just get it out of the way that this is not talking about anything physical or literal. I always find it fascinating to imagine what it would be like if it was physical or literal, and this is what it would be like. It would stick up into outer space, 1,500 miles. It would cover about half of the United States. And if it was actually made of gold, it would crush the Earth's crust with the weight of it. And it would really mess with not just the rotation of the Earth, but gravity. Gravity would be changed by this thing sitting on the Earth, and it would really cause a lot of problems. So, Holy City is not designed to cause problems, it's designed to solve problems. So it must not be a literal thing. One of the ways that we can think about it is sort of more of the surface symbolism of it, which is that it's got these gates facing all these different directions. And there's a kind of a beautiful symbolism to just that. There's this passage from Luke that says, "They will come from east and west, from north and south, and sit down in the kingdom of God." And then these various passages from the Third Testament, "The Lord has provided that there should be some religion almost everywhere, and that everyone who believes in God and does not do evil because it is against God should have a place in heaven. Heaven cannot be made up of the people of one religion only. It needs people from many religions. Mutual love and charity bring such people together into one, despite the variety among them, because it draws unity out of variety. There are indeed many means or ways or paths of being saved, but each and every one of them relates to living a good life and believing the right things." So I've always loved that symbolism of the gates facing different directions and that idea that people can be on very different paths in life, even to the point where you might look at somebody else's path and say, "I think you're going the opposite direction from me." And maybe, yes, but it may still be the right direction because everybody's coming to a common center eventually. And I've always loved that symbolism of the way that the gates work, the unity that comes from variety. But I want to dive a little deeper tonight into the symbolism. And so I'm going to read some passages, and then we're going to get down to talking about what each of the gates might symbolize. Thinking about it this way, you could think about it as if we're each going through a gate. Like I've got my perspective on life, somebody else has a different perspective, so we're all coming from different places and we're each going through a gate. But today I want to explore more of what it might be like to think of it in terms of we all each go through all of the gates, because this is not a spatial thing. This is a symbolic thing. And so we can, spiritually speaking, go through all 12 of the gates. And I think that's an important part of our spiritual life, to go through all 12 of the gates. So what does that mean? Here's a passage from Apocalypse Revealed 1:76. In the spiritual world, there are actually paths that lead to heaven, and here and there one finds gates. People who are being led by the Lord to heaven go along paths that lead to it, and they enter through the gates. For everything seen in the heavens is a correspondent form, and so too are paths and gates. Paths indeed correspond to truths and consequently symbolize them, and gates correspond to an entryway and so symbolize it. Since both ways and doors exist in the spiritual world, and angelic spirits actually travel along those ways or paths and enter through doors when they enter into heaven, therefore doors and gates are often mentioned in the word, and they symbolize an entryway. Because a door symbolizes an entryway, the New Jerusalem symbolizes a church, and the New Jerusalem symbolizes a church formed of people who are governed by truths springing from goodness derived from the Lord. Therefore, the New Jerusalem is described also in respect to its gates, with angels upon them, and they are said to be not shut. So in some ways, the holy city can represent heaven, and even to some extent, the idea of heaven in the afterlife, where we actually might see gates symbolically saying, this is the way, go this way. But it also represents the church, and so it also represents states of heaven, spiritual states of heaven that we can experience. And there might be ways in which we each enter through our own gate, but there might also be ways in which all the gates are welcoming us. Here's another passage. Secrets of Heaven 2851. The gate to heaven opens to people who devote themselves to the goodness and truth that come from there. There are two paths that lead to a person's rational mind: a higher or more inward path that gives access to goodness and truth from the Lord, and a lower or more outward path through which evil and falsity sneak in from hell. The rational mind itself lies at the meeting point of the two paths. In the word, this level of the mind is compared to and called a city on account of the goodness and truth present in it. Since it is compared to and called a city, gates are marked out for it. So we can also think about the holy city representing a kind of state within our mind, in our rational mind, that we enter into through gates, the gates being the thing that brings us into that state, whatever that state might be. All right, so here's a bit about what the 12 gates symbolize. 12 gates on the holy city symbolize all the concepts of truth and goodness by which a person is introduced into the church. And this might mean literally introduced into a church community. Here's an idea that brought somebody in, or it might be introduced into the state of the church within ourselves. Gates, gates symbolize concepts of truth and goodness from the word because a person is introduced into the church by them. The holy city actually means the Lord's spiritual kingdom. The gates, wall, and foundations symbolize different facets of neighborly love and faith. And the number 12, repeated so often, means all of them. Hey, Richard. So the number 12 is there not because there are only 12 ways to get into the church, or 12 ways to get into a state of heaven, or that rational part of our mind that is close to heaven. It's because it represents all the ways, all of the numerous ways that people are introduced into states of the church and states of heaven. So it could be much more than 12, although we will be looking at 12 specific ones tonight. It also mentions that they were made of pearl. This is where that phrase, the pearly gates, comes from. 12 gates were 12 pearls. Each gate was of one pearl. This symbolically means that an acknowledgement and concept of the Lord join all the concepts of truth and goodness in the word into one and introduce into the church. The 12 gates symbolize in sum the concepts of truth and goodness by which a person is introduced into the church. 12 pearls also symbolize in sum concepts of truth and goodness. That is why the gates were pearls. Each gate was of one pearl, because all the concepts of truth and goodness symbolized by the gates and by pearls relate to a single concept, one that is their containing vessel. And that single concept is a concept of the Lord. This is something that I think is really important and beautifully symbolized by this pearl. And I always, like when I'm giving a membership class or when I'm talking to people about the church, I often will come back to that one pearl. For me, it is God is love. That is the pearl that brings me into that state of the church. And I think ultimately unites all the different ideas and concepts. It all goes back to that idea that, well, who is God? God is love itself. So that's why they are a pearl. And you could even think about it as each gate is one pearl, or you could even think about it as all 12 gates are the same pearl. Once again, it's not spatial, so that we can do that. All relating to the one concept of who the Lord is. The gates are not shut. Its gates shall not be shut by day, for there shall be no night there, which symbolically means that the New Jerusalem continually receives into it people who possess truths that spring from the goodness of love from the Lord, because it has no falsity in its faith. So the gates are always open to the holy city. I love that image as well. And they face the 4 cardinal directions. So here's a passage about that. Apocalypse Revealed 9:01. The east symbolizes love and an affection for goodness in a higher degree, thus in greater measure, whereas the west symbolizes love and affection for goodness in a lower degree, thus in lesser measure. And the south symbolizes wisdom and an affection for truth in a higher degree, thus in greater measure, whereas the north symbolizes wisdom and affection for truth in a lower degree, thus in lesser measure. So the east-west axis is about goodness, and the north-south is about truth to greater or lesser degrees. And what a wonderful image of the Lord's welcoming in that he's not saying you have to come in by just the east. There's this, once again, this beautiful image of the accommodation to our imperfect states. And the Lord wants us to come through however it works, even if we're coming in through states of somewhat obscurity in that northern section. Still, the Lord wants us to enter into those heavenly states, no matter what. All right, so here's where we start to get into a little bit more detail. The 12 tribes and the 12 angels. And over the gates, 12 angels with names written on them, which are those of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. And these symbolize all the truths and goods of the church. The 12 angels symbolize here all the truths and goods of heaven. So the name of the tribe, that represents the church, and the angel represents the heaven. So it's the heaven and the church represented by angels and tribes. The 12 angels have the same symbolism as the 12 tribes because heaven and the church are really the same thing, just talking about the spiritual and natural realms of it. They symbolize every aspect of faith, and so they symbolize the Lord, the source of faith, and everything having to do with faith. So we've been hearing a lot about the gates represent all the truths and goods of the church in heaven. But what are those? It's so fascinating to me that in the book Apocalypse Revealed, which is talking about the book of Revelation, it doesn't go into it. It doesn't go into what each of the gates represent, which is kind of fascinating. But we can piece it together with some other things. This is from New Jerusalem and its heavenly doctrine, the first passage there. The 12 gates, which were pearls, mean introductory truths, as do the 12 angels on the gates. The 12 tribes of Israel mean all elements of the church in general and in particular, as do the 12 apostles. On the gates of the city, meaning truths that lead us to a body of teaching, and through that teaching into the church, see these passages from Secrets of Heaven. And then on the 12 tribes of Israel, as representing and therefore symbolizing everything good and true in the church, both in general and in particular, and therefore all aspects of faith and love, see these passages in Secrets of Heaven. So it's directing us to, if you want to know more that doesn't get covered in Apocalypse Revealed, go look it up in Secrets of Heaven. There are lots of passages there talking about the 12 tribes and what they each represent. So I want to go through each of those 12 tribes briefly, because these are the gates. These are the names on the gates of each of the entrances to the holy city. So this is taken from the part of when we hear about the sons being born. So this is a specific reading of the 12 tribes, the first one, when they are born. And as we'll hear, they have slightly different symbolisms in different places in the word, but this is connected mostly to the reading of when they're born. So Reuben is first, and his name means see a son. And he's a son of Leah. And she said, the Lord has seen my affliction. So that was his name, Reuben. And we're told that that means faith in the understanding. You know, when we say, oh, I see, I understand. That's Reuben, see. And then Simeon, the second one, means heard. That name means heard. The Lord has heard that I'm unloved. And so that refers to not faith in the understanding, but faith in the will. When our understanding moves into a place where we're not just thinking about it, we're going to try to do something. So it's connected to obedience. I'm going to obey the 10 commandments. I know what they mean, and I'm going to try to obey them. That's Simeon, heard. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do and hear. Then Levi means attach or join or connect or unite in Hebrew. Leah said, my husband will become attached to me, and so named him Levi. And so you can see how that is a good word for charity or spiritual love or love of the neighbor, which connects us, unites us, attaches us to each other. That's what Levi means. And then Judah means praise. Now I will praise the Lord, said Leah when he was born. And so Judah represents love to the Lord, praising the Lord. So this is the first four, and these are often talked about in this progression, because this is kind of a progression that we go through in our spiritual lives. We first understand what the word is teaching us, then we want to try to follow it, obey it, and that leads us to a state of charity with people, and that then hopefully leads us to a state of loving the Lord because of seeing the blessings of that charity. But that's not the end. You might think, oh, that's a nice little package of spiritual life that could end right there. But it's not. It's not the end. There's much more to spiritual life than just those four things. So then we have Dan. Dan means judge. Interestingly, there was also a daughter who was born, and her name was Dinah, and her name means judge as well. So both Dan and Dinah mean judge. And this is the son of Bilhah, Rachel's maid. God has judged my case. And so Dan means judgment, judgment of what is good and true. And you can kind of see how some of these meanings of the 12 tribes have kind of layers of meaning. And very often when you look it up, it'll say this tribe or this person means this, and this, depending on what level of spiritual life you're talking about, the celestial, spiritual, natural. I tried to sort of condense it down to one concept that's mostly connected to the Hebrew meaning to make it simpler. But they often have many different meanings. But you can see how judgment is one of those things where that might be something that brings us into like the beginnings of being in the church. And it might initially be judgment in the wrong way. Like, I know what's right and wrong. I have Reuben. I'm obeying it. And now I feel like I can make judgments of other people. And that might be sort of an initial thing that brings us into some state of the church, but it's not really the state of the church if it's judging other people. And so to really come into the church, we need that judgment to be directed towards ourselves, that self-judgment of, okay, I can see the mistakes I've made. And this might actually come after those first steps. I'm going to understand the truth. I'm going to try to do it. I'm living a life of charity. I love the Lord. Oh, now I need to go through some self-examination and notice the faults that I'm engaged in. And that gets us into a new place in our spiritual life. So that Dan is an important gate into a state of heaven. And this often then leads immediately to naphtali, meaning wrestling. With great wrestlings, I, Rachel, have wrestled with my sister Leah, and indeed I have prevailed. So naphtali represents temptation or spiritual struggle. This is, once again, sort of that next phase of spiritual life. The first part feels easy. Oh, it's clear. You understand the truth, you do it. Bada bing, bada boom, you're in heaven. No, then you enter into the hard parts. Self-examination, the spiritual struggle of, whoa, I'm not even sure what's right and wrong anymore, and really wrestling with things. But that's a really important part of entering into states of heaven and the church. Then we have Gad. Gad is an interesting name because some people say it means troop. Some people say it means fortune. And so some translations you'll see it says a troop comes, which seems kind of random. What? Why are you naming your child because you just said a troop comes? And other translations say, what a good fortune, which makes a little bit more sense. But the Third Testament seems to go with troop, as that's the correct translation of it. And it seems like it's connected. When you look it up, it talks about how Gad represents good deeds, doing good deeds. And I think the troop comes in with the idea of doing many good deeds, a multitude of good deeds. This is part of what spiritual life is about too. It's not just doing something nice once and saying, all right, I'm done, I'm a good person. No, it's many, many, many of them, multitudes of good deeds throughout our life. That's what Gad is about. And that's a significant entrance into states of heaven as well. Asher means happy or happiness. They said, I am happy for the daughters will call me blessed. And happiness is such an important part of all of this, especially after what we've just heard about, judgment and wrestling and doing lots of good deeds that can sometimes lead us to a place of feeling overworked. But to be reminded that happiness is such an important part of spiritual life. It's not just about doing a multitude of good deeds and being overwhelmed by that. So happiness, I think that's such an important part, especially that idea that the Lord wants us to be happy. That it's not just about doing the right things and making the Lord happy by doing those right things. It's that the Lord, because the Lord is love itself, wants us to feel states of happiness. And that's a really important part of entering into states of heaven. This is another area where you could kind of see how there might be like a surface level area of this entrance. Some people might come into states of heaven by thinking happiness is the way to heaven. And this is where we start to get into that place of maybe it's actually better that we enter through all 12 and not just one, because heaven is not just about happiness. It's an important part of states of heaven and the church, but it's not just about happiness. So we need all of these states. So I'm glad that Asher's there, and I'm also glad that it's not the only gate, even though it's probably the gate most of us want to go through. All right, and then Issachar means wages or reward in Hebrew. God has given me my wages. And it talks about how Issachar represents the reward of mutual love. This This kind of follows nicely after Asher, because there is this sense, sometimes, once again, this surface level idea of heaven being a reward. I'm going to do good things to get to heaven. And that's my reward for doing those good things. And that seems like that's the gate, the entrance. But the real gate into states of heaven is recognizing that mutual love itself is the reward. The joy that comes from loving each other, loving and being loved, that's connected very much to that happiness. And so Issachar comes right next. But that's what the reward is doing good for the sake of goodness and feeling the joy of that. A very important part of entering states of heaven in the church. Zebulun means dwelling or living with in Hebrew. Now my husband will dwell with me. And so this represents the marriage of goodness and truth. This is a fairly obvious one for those of us who've grown up in new church circles, because there's that joke about being in a high school religion class where if you don't know what the answer is, just put goodness and truth, and you'll probably pass. Because so much of the Third Testament is about the marriage of goodness and truth. And so it makes sense that one of these gates would be Zebulun. The marriage of goodness and truth is a very important part of this. And you can see also how Zebulun is coming a little bit later, because we learn all these things, we try to apply them into our lives, and we try to love other people and love the Lord, and we go through hard times, and those are all important parts of our spiritual life. But I think it's kind of later in our spiritual progression that we really start to understand what the marriage is about, that those two, goodness and truth, need to be married, and that it's not a static thing, it's a very flexible living thing to be living in the marriage of goodness and truth. It's a dynamic kind of dance, like a wedding dance. And there's a certain amount of maturity that is required to really be living in that marriage of goodness and truth. So Zebulun comes a little later in this progression. And then we get Joseph and Benjamin at the end. Joseph's name means he will add. The Lord shall add to me another son. And Joseph represents the spiritual part of our lives, the charity that is the source of true faith, or the charity that comes from faith. This is often referred to as the celestial of the spiritual in the Third Testament. And you can think about the way that the spiritual part of our life adds so much to our natural lives. And this is kind of that experience of feeling the way that everything we've just gone through in learning the truth, applying it to life, going through temptations, all of that adds to our experience of life in a positive way. And so Joseph kind of reflects back on everything that has come before and recognizing it as this is all part of our spiritual life, and it all kind of focuses in on charity. And so this is kind of the next phase of charity. Levi also represents charity, love of the neighbor, but it's more of that initial, oh yeah, I'm gonna love my neighbor. But Joseph is the more mature version of loving the neighbor, really understanding why we should be loving our neighbor and not just doing it because we're told to, seeing the value of it. That's Joseph. And then what follows naturally, these are the two sons of Rachel. What follows naturally after that is Benjamin, meaning son of the right hand, and that describes the truth son that comes from goodness, right hand. The faith that comes from charity, or the enlightened truth that comes from goodness, the spiritual of the celestial, as opposed to the celestial of the spiritual. Interestingly, Benjamin also represents, in other contexts, the intermediate connector between our internal lives and our external lives. And that's kind of a wonderful way for the 12 to end, because there's this progression in our spiritual lives that goes sort of from the bottom up, with Reuben going up to Judah, lifting us up to states of heaven. But then real spiritual growth has this descending part too, where all of that needs to come down into our natural lives. And so it's appropriate that it ends with Benjamin, that connector, bringing it down to earth where the rubber meets the road in our natural lives as well, not just our spiritual lives. Yes. Oh, there's a microphone there. You'll have to turn it on. Just you hear it? You have to push it down. Oh, wait till yeah, there you go.
When Jacob becomes Israel, that's in between Joseph and Benjamin, right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
So Benjamin is actually the first real son of Israel because all the other brothers are sons of Jacob.
Yeah.
Because he hasn't become Israel yet.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And I wonder if that was ever addressed. I don't remember seeing any.
Maybe. I hadn't noticed that before. That's a great point, but I'm sure that is significant that way. Yeah.
And Dinah is a daughter of Leah.
I think it's Leah. Yeah. 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 She came. I want to say after the.
Or was one of the handmaids?
It was earlier on.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. And yeah, people online, if you have any thoughts or comments or questions, please speak up because I can't see all of you right now. So you can just pipe up. If we want to, I was gonna just plow forward, but go ahead. Use the microphone.
This is what I did my master's thesis on.
Oh no! Now I'm nervous.
But it's also the breastplate.
Yes.
And the foundation of the holy city is the same stones.
Yeah.
And what I freshly noticed and freshly made alive, because it was a long time ago, is the levels of 3 that they're really the same. Each 4 is the same. Like you take the 4, like the celestial level and then the spiritual one. And that Benjamin is the wolf that saves as the blessing. I don't know if you're going to get into that, but it's if you look at the 12 steps in the AA groups, you get to that 12th one and it's go and find somebody and help them. Is go out and save from all that you know, from all that from that height of Joseph of being in that connection with the Lord. You don't just stay up there. The radiance of what is celestial goes out and acts as a minister, which is the Benjamin, is the heaven of the ministers, goes out and saves people. Nice. And that's what is to be angelic, and to have all 3 levels of heaven be alive inside somebody. But I hadn't put it together with the going through all the gates. That's neat.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. We could spend weeks on the 12 tribes, and we're going to only be able to do a little bit with them. If you want to learn more about them, there is this wonderful book that Harry and Dawn put together, 12 Qualities of the Spiritual Mind, and it talks about not just the 12 tribes, but the 12 apostles and all the other 12s and all the connections between those. And yeah, there's so much packed into this. Understandably, it represents everything about religion. But today I wanted to focus in on not just the 12 tribes, but in a minute we're going to get to how does it connect back to the Holy City? Because this is not something that is necessarily super obvious in the Third Testament, but we can make the connections there. So these are the ideas, and yes, it's fine to ask questions at any point. I'm just going to keep going, but please put your hand up or call out. So here's, I just put all 12 together so you can see all 12 in one screen. I loved going through and learning the names in Hebrew, I really think that that's a great way to remember what each of them means. That Reuben means seeing, so it's faith and the understanding, okay, that makes sense. So to sort of simplify them down to these simple concepts, there's a lot more packed into it than just these simple concepts, but we can kind of work with these ones and see how, yeah, overall, these are all things that bring us into states of the church in various ways. And you can see how there's a kind of progression here. This is based on the birth order, but the 12 tribes have many different orders in the word. And so this passage talks about that. Apocalypse Revealed 3:49. The 12 tribes have one symbolism in the order in which they're listed according to their births, which we just learned about. And that represents a certain thing. It represents that kind of progression of spiritual growth that starts with Reuben and ends with Benjamin. And that's a specific way of understanding them. But they have another symbolism in the order in which they're listed when they went into Egypt, which is different. You can see Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun. It's slightly different. Joseph and Benjamin are not last in that order. Still another symbolism in the order in which they were blessed by their father Israel. Still another symbolism in the order in which they were blessed by Moses. And still another symbolism in the order in which they encamped when they were in their tribes in the wilderness. And this is where we start to get a little bit back to the holy city, because they camped in a specific square pattern with 3 on different cardinal direction sides. And that was a specific order. There was a specific order to those. And still another symbolism in the order in which they're listed elsewhere. And it lists many other places. And it's kind of overwhelming to think about, oh, what are all those differences and nuances? But it also makes sense. If you think about the various spiritual lives of people, there's so much nuance to how we all come into states of heaven. And so, of course, there would be these different orders to reference those different nuances. Secrets of Heaven 39:39. Oh, yes, Judy. Yep. Can you pass the...
In number 3, there's 12, but there's no Joseph. Well, I'm Reuben, Simeon, Gad, Ephraim, Manasseh, Benjamin. Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. And oh no, that's only never.
Yeah, but you're right. There are some orders in which Ephraim and Manasseh replace Joseph, because Ephraim and Manasseh are the sons of Joseph, which then messes with the number. And so that often kicks another one out. Levi is kicked out when it's talking about things like the placement of the tribes in the Holy Land, because they didn't get an allotment of land. They were throughout the land as the priesthood. But there are other places, like there's one of the descriptions, I think it's in Revelation, it just leaves out Dan. And there's no explanation. It's just Dan is not there. One of them, I think, leaves out, I forget, it might be Reuben, because of the adultery that happened. And that might have been why he was left out. But there are various reasons why some of the numbers are different and why some of the people are different. I'm not going to get into all of those, because we would spend weeks on that. I want to, this whole thing is sort of gently pointing us back towards the holy city, because that's the order that I'm really curious about. When we're thinking about June 19th, what is the order of the tribes on the gates of the holy city? That's what we're heading towards. Each son of Israel or tribe of Israel symbolizes the nature of people in the state the passage is describing. Their nature is also reflected in the order in which the sons are named, because the nature and quality of the first person listed extends and passes into those that follow. A list that starts with Reuben, or faith, implies one thing. One that starts with Judah, or heavenly love, implies another. And one that starts with Joseph, or spiritual love, implies another. Their symbolism varies then in the passages where they are named. Here, where their birth is the topic, they symbolize general attributes of the church and consequently all facets of faith and love that make up the church. They have this symbolism because the preceding material deals with human rebirth, or the states we go through before we become a church. In the highest sense, it deals with the Lord and the way he made his humanity divine. And so it deals with the ascent of the ladder that Jacob saw in Bethel, leading all the way to Jehovah. So that's that image of sort of climbing up. And we saw that in that birth order. But when they're in a different order, it's not necessarily referring to that sort of climbing up. Here's an interesting passage talking about the mothers and what the mothers add to this whole symbolism. The sons of Leah symbolize outer forms of divine goodness and truth in their order. Jacob's firstborn, Reuben, symbolizes good done out of faith. Simeon or I added the things in brackets to make it a little bit more clear. Simeon or obedience, and Levi, charity, Judah, love of God, and Issachar, reward, Zebulun, marriage of goodness and truth, symbolize their essential elements of the outer forms of goodness and truth. Sons of Rachel, Joseph, spiritual love, and Benjamin, enlightened truth, symbolize inner goodness and truth. You can see that now that we've understood what those mean. Spiritual love, not just love, but spiritual love, that's inner goodness. Enlightened truth, Benjamin, that's inner truth. And the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, Dan, judgment, Naphtali, temptation, symbolize secondary kinds of serving the inner kinds. So you can see how judgment and temptation are secondary kinds of serving that. And the sons of Zilpah, Gad, good deeds, and Asher, happiness, symbolizing serving those outer kinds. You can see how just happiness by itself is a little bit more of an outer kind of goodness. And just doing good deeds by themselves, that's a little bit more of an outer kind of goodness. Whereas judging ourselves, that internal focus, that's more of an inner thing. Spiritual temptation, that's a little bit more of an inner thing. So you can see how each of the mothers add a little bit of a quality to what these different sons represent. The 12 tribes symbolize the process from beginning to end, the process of establishing the church, which is the subject of the next few phases. Jacob's 12 sons and the tribes named for them symbolize everything good and true, that is, everything connected with love and faith in its entirety. However, their symbolism varies with the order in which they are named. The attributes they symbolize are as far beyond counting as all the attributes in general and in particular that constitute the church and the Lord's kingdom. No one but the Lord knows what their specific symbolism is when they're listed in one order or another. Not even heaven's inhabitants know, unless they learn from the Lord. A little bit later, we're going to get into some speculation. So I put this in as a caveat. Yeah, we're speculating on some things because only the Lord knows really what these orders are about, unless we are given that answer in the Third Testament. Here's an interesting one. This is the order in which they appear in Revelation chapter 7. So this is before the Holy City. This is the list of the 144,000 and the tribes listed there. And it's in this order. Judah first, love of the Lord. Reuben is referred to as wisdom at this point, not just understanding or seeing, but wisdom. And then Gad, not just good deeds, but usefulness. And you can see that there's that sort of trinity there, love, wisdom, usefulness in those first three. Asher, happiness, the happiness of mutual love, not just happiness, but the happiness of mutual love is what it says there. Naphtali, who normally represents temptation, represents an awareness of what is useful. It's kind of an interesting take on temptation. Oh yeah, this is good for me to be going through this hard time. I'm aware that it's useful. That's connected actually to Naphtali. Manasseh, this is one of the lists where Dan doesn't show up. Manasseh is there and represents a will to serve. Manasseh and Ephraim represent the will and intellect of the spiritual mind. So Joseph is that spiritual part of us, which includes a will and intellect, the sons of him, Manasseh and Ephraim. So Manasseh is the will to serve. Simeon, love of obeying the Lord's commandments, that's that obedience. So many of these are very similar to what they were before. Levi here is called the love of truth instead of charity. So that's an interesting one, interesting change or nuance. You can see how when they're in a different order, they sometimes show up the same way, but other times they show up in a very different way. Levi looks kind of different. Love of truth instead of charity. Issachar, the goodness of life. What was Issachar before? No, I'm blanking on it. Issachar. Yeah, I'm blanking on what Issachar was before, but the goodness of life. Zebulun, marriage of goodness and truth, that stays the same. Joseph, not Ephraim. Ephraim is not included in this list, but Manasseh is. That's kind of interesting. Is the doctrine of goodness and truth. So before, Joseph was more about the goodness, the charity, the life of spirituality in goodness. But here, it's more about the doctrine of that goodness. And then Benjamin still is the truth from that goodness. So that's interesting that it ends that way with those two. So that's Revelation 7. So that's just a little bit of a taste of the fact that when they're in a different order, they can represent slightly different things because they're representing a different phase or part of our spiritual life. Richard.
That's 14 some total.
Microphone there.
Thank you. So it comes down to the fact that there's 14 sons total, and there'll be 12, a combination of 12 out of those 14, and it varies throughout the Revelation.
Yeah, it is interesting.
And nobody but the Lord knows what it really means.
Yeah, it is interesting. 14 is twice 7, which is
Yes.
a lovely number. But it is interesting that there's those two extras that get added on and sometimes replace. Yeah, it's fascinating. Tom.
It's in a way, this is trivial, but it reminded me of when it said there that only the Lord knows all the combinations, what you had there before. Nobody can know all the different combinations of humanity and their order in a different gate, as it were. If you take a deck of cards, 52 cards, and one person shuffles them, that's different than anyone who's ever shuffled a deck of cards in history, if everyone did it, or anyone in the world today. And it's a number beyond really our comprehension. The number of combinations of just 52 cards shuffled.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
I think it would be interesting to have a discussion about each state. Like read one of the states. What's Zebulon?
Marriage of goodness and truth.
Okay, I mean that's sort of an easy one, but how do we marry
Yeah,
goodness and truth? In what state do we learn different levels of truth?
yeah,
You know, how do we each of us bring it to life? What is in our thought that is true, that we actually are aware of an external thing that we're dealing with? Each of these states can have hours of discussion of how are they brought into life.
yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's well illustrated in the sheer size of the holy city. Like you look at the gates from far away and they look like these tiny pearls. You get up close in terms of the size of it, and they are these massive gates because there's so much involved in each one of them. Yeah, it would be fascinating to do like a sermon series on the 12 and talk about each one in its own place and time. But even then, you could do that sermon series in many different ways. Like, okay, now we're going to shuffle the deck and we're going to do the sermon series Revelation 7 version, and that would be a completely different sermon series. And so yeah, there's a lot involved in all of these. But once again, I'm pointing us slowly towards the one I want to focus on tonight, which is the Holy City version of this. What is their order on the 12 gates of the Holy City, New Jerusalem? And to find out what this is, we have to go back to the Old Testament, because Ezekiel had a vision of the Holy City, just like John did. And in Ezekiel's vision, unlike John's, it tells you which tribe goes on which gate. John didn't say that, but Ezekiel does. This is Ezekiel 48. These are the exits of the city. On the north side, measuring 4,500 cubits, the gates of the city shall be named after the tribes of Israel. The 3 gates northward, 1 gate for Reuben, 1 gate for Judah, 1 gate for Levi. On the east side, 4,500 cubits, 3 gates, 1 gate for Joseph, 1 gate for Benjamin, and 1 gate for Dan. On the south side, measuring 4,500 cubits, 3 gates, 1 gate for Simeon, 1 gate for Issachar, and 1 gate for Zebulun. On the west side, 4,500 cubits with their 3 gates, 1 gate for Gad, 1 gate for Asher, and 1 gate for Naphtali. And usually when the order is listed in a certain way, you go with that order. Like it doesn't say which gate, like how to arrange the 3 on each side, but I think most people have assumed that you sort of read it going around the city counterclockwise. So I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. And the Third Testament does confirm that this vision of Ezekiel's holy city is the same holy city as John's. In the New Jerusalem, there will be 3 gates to the north, 3 to the east, 3 to the south, and 3 to the west. And then it references both Ezekiel 48 and Revelation 21. Like John in Revelation, the Old Testament prophets describe a new Jerusalem that also symbolizes the Lord's new church. Examples are to be found in various places, but especially in Ezekiel 40 through 48, where the New Jerusalem, the new temple, and the new land is in an inner sense depict the Lord's kingdom and in the heavens and his kingdom on the earth, which is the church. And look at Ezekiel 48 to find out about that. The text goes on to say that the city had 12 gates according to the names of Israel's tribes, and it lists them in that order. So this is just the Third Testament confirming that, yep, that vision of Ezekiel's, it's the same vision. So that's where we can apply that back to the Revelation Holy City. And this is what it would look like. Reuben, Judah, and Levi on the north. Joseph, Benjamin, Dan on the east. Simeon, Issachar, Zebulun. This is putting them in the order of how they were read in Ezekiel, but going counterclockwise. So Simeon, Issachar, Zebulun, and then Gad, Asher, Naphtali, completing the circle on the west. And this is really fascinating because it's not super intuitive. Sometimes it might be, but sometimes it isn't. So I put them around the city with their meanings and also with the meanings of the directions. And in some cases, it makes sense on the surface. And in other ways, it doesn't seem to make sense. Like for me, I really don't want Dan on the east side. That just doesn't work for me, but it apparently works for the Lord, so I'm going to go with that. It makes sense to me that Joseph and Benjamin are on the east. That's great. Faith, love of God, and charity on the north. Lesser truth. That's so fascinating. Lesser goodness, temptation, happiness, good deeds. I can see how those fit on the west side. And then the south, marriage of goodness and truth, the reward of mutual love and obedience. Okay, that makes a bit of sense. I put them here, and at this point, it's open for discussion because I think we could just sort of speculate on why are they placed here. This is the different order. And it probably has a different symbolization to like that progression. The birth order is that progression of spiritual growth. But this is different. This is entrance into states of the church in heaven. And why are they here? So yes, Nancy, I see you have the microphone. Go ahead.
All the center gates are all the blessings.
Mm,
See that?
yeah, I like that.
You see that?
Love of God, enlightened truth, happiness.
And the other
reward.
ones are the hands on either side, the right and the left hand of each one.
Yeah. I was so tempted to rearrange the sides in the way that made sense to me. And I was like, nope, can't do that. I'm going to do it in the order in the word and leave it there, even if it doesn't make sense to me initially.
So if you're coming with Judah, which is praising God, love of God, you have charity and faith are your left and your right side.
Mhm.
And if you're in Benjamin, enlightenment, the spiritual, the celestial, you have spiritual love and judgment. The Lord is the just, the judge and the
Mhm.
mercy.
Yeah.
And then you have obedience and the marriage of good and truth together with the reward of mutual love
Yeah.
and temptations and good deeds. It's just the right and the left side
Yeah.
of a happy approach to the Lord.
I love that. And I love the idea of thinking of it in terms of the Lord's judgment comes from that greater good. That makes a lot of sense to me, that's where the Lord's judgment would be, on that greater good side. The thing that keeps bothering me is Judah, love of God in the north. I would not have put that there. Why is Judah in the north? I see Kevin raised your hand. Kevin, go ahead.
I was just wondering if it makes a difference that in Ezekiel, it very clearly states that these are exits. And I wonder if that has to do with, like, in the Old Testament version, the flow is outward, whereas in the Revelation section or the Third Testament, the flow is inward. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if, like, from the Old Testament perspective, it's kind of like looking at where do we begin? And this is the Lord coming out of the holy city to meet people, and the requirements that you begin with in obscurity are the same. It's faith, charity, and love of God, and that starts the cycle. And just wondering if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, that's a fascinating take on it. Yeah, I like that.
Talking too much, but it's also that the holy city is doctrine. And this is the entrances into the doctrine of our life. But there's also that they're all qualities of the Lord.
Mhm.
North isn't bad, it's the quality of the Lord.
Yeah.
And if you look in each, when they give the explanation of each, they give the quality of the Lord that is that, and it's about knowing the Lord when we come into that doctrinal space. And being in that north is the humility of knowing that all things are God.
Yeah. I was just thinking that same thing of the love of God. To truly love God, we have to recognize our own limitation of our understanding of truth, and that is the north state. Like, I really don't know everything about God, so that I'm going to put that on the north. That makes a lot of sense. Any other thoughts about this? I wanted to just leave this here because I have questions about it, and I don't have answers necessarily, but I thought it would make for an interesting pondering and discussion. So any other thoughts?
The only other thought I have is that all good things from the Lord start in states of obscurity for us. So, like, the good things are on the north side there, like love of God and charity and faith. Like, it's like God is working that, even though it's like in a state of darkness for us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Richard.
I was wondering if we made arrows to go from the order of their actual birth, from Reuben to Simeon, to Levi, Judah, if that would make any sense.
Hmm.
But when I look at it, I think, no, it wouldn't.
Yeah. It is interesting, though, that Reuben and Simeon end up on the sides that they are.
Yeah.
Faith being a state of lesser truth than obedience. Like that makes sense to me, that understanding the truth is one thing, but you're in a greater light of truth when you're actually living it, which is more of the Simeon obedience. So that makes sense that they would be on those opposite sides. I think, Tom, did you have your hand up?
Would you clarify what Kevin brought up about in Ezekiel, it's outward?
Yeah, the reference there, I can just quick go back to that. These are the exits of the city.
Well, and then what Kevin said made me think, in the time of Ezekiel, it's the Israelitish church, which is a representative of a church. It's in externals.
Yeah.
And in the book of Revelation, the holy city is inward. So it just seems to fit that way.
Yeah, I like that. And it is interesting to think about, even though the Third Testament does connect those two, it says Ezekiel and Revelation are referring to the holy city. It is interesting to think that even though here we are applying the Ezekiel version to the Revelation version, maybe the Revelation version is actually different and we just don't know it. And this is all speculation. Who knows? Yes, Paige.
This is just getting into the nitty gritty, but at the end of the Ezekiel passage where it says that above the door or the entrance, it says the Lord is there. What does that, like, that's a strange statement.
Yeah.
And yeah, could you just talk about that for a minute?
Yeah.
If you know.
Well, I mean, it makes sense to me. For me, it sort of goes back to that idea of the pearl, that all of this points back to the Lord, to who the Lord is. And that really is the center of the city, that's where the Lord is, whether we're talking about heaven or the church or our heart and mind. The center is always going to be the Lord is there. It reminds me a little bit of the I am passage. I am that I am, or I am who I am. That's who the Lord is. And the city, the holy city, heaven, well, to put it simply, it's where the Lord is. And that's
I
the
think
city.
I was thinking, well, shouldn't it be the Lord? I mean, shouldn't it be the Lord is here?
Here, yeah.
That was sort of my first thought.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's part of that Old Testament thing too, that
I'll try something before
Yeah.
Richard about that. It makes me think of, I love that the name of the city in Ezekiel is not the New Jerusalem.
yeah,
It's the Lord is there,
yeah,
which I think of as prophecy. It's like Emmanuel, God with us. The Lord is in this thing I'm talking about. I'm a prophet.
mhm,
And then when it's imminent, it's John and Patmos. I'm talking about the holy city of New Jerusalem.
yeah, like that.
I think so. I wonder, could we look that up in the Hebrew real quick to see what that is? Ezekiel 48, 35. Do you have the ability, like on BibleHub.com?
I can't do it on my computer right
Okay.
now without
me try.
leaving this, but yeah, feel free to look it up. I'd be curious.
What came into my mind was the Lord walking on the water, and boats also correspond to the doctrine of our life, just like the Holy City does.
Hmm.
And the Lord asked Peter to step out of his boat, and then they step back in together. That without the Lord, you have to step out of your man-made doctrine. And then when the Lord gets in the boat, then it's the Lord's city.
Hmm.
Then it's the Lord's doctrine. It's, if the Lord's not there, you're just in man-made doctrine.
Yeah.
But and you need to step out of that and invite the Lord into the boat. Because without the Lord being there, he's the sun and moon of the city, and the holy tree in the middle that is the word, that is the city. And he is the city.
Yeah.
So it's important to remember that all these things are talking about the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you go, if you want to go and look up each of the tribes in that original section in their birth order, you can see how the first meaning given is always at that highest level, talking about either the Lord or the divine, some divine quality. And then it talks about other qualities in a sort of a descending pattern of, and here's a spiritual meaning, and here's more of the natural meaning. So yeah, it's all of them are referring to qualities of the Lord at that highest level. Yeah, Richard.
Thank you. Yahweh Shema.
Mm,
That's what I have so far.
nice.
But it's kind of awkward. Let me see if I'm not that fluid on the phone as I am, on a personal computer. But it looks like that from that day is a Yahweh Shema.
Nice. Thank you. All right. Any other thoughts about any of this? My doctrinal classes have been going too long lately, so I was really aiming for a shorter one tonight. So
It's beautiful. Probably one of the most beautiful images.
oh, good. The last thing I want to share, and I had mentioned this before, that my hope is to do a labyrinth vespers that's based on these ideas. And so that's the next phase of this, is to think about for next June 19th, how might we want to take some of these ideas and incorporate them into something that would be a Vespers at the Labyrinth. I'm sort of picturing gates along the path, 12 gates along the path, and we could place them strategically on the appropriate sides, the cardinal directions. The entrance of our labyrinth starts in the south, so we might have one of these southern gates as one of the first ones. But this is something we could all be thinking about for the next year. How might we want to incorporate these ideas into a labyrinth vespers? Clearly, there's too much, as we've just seen, to talk about to cover all of this in a vespers service. But we could take some important ideas from this and hopefully turn it into a meaningful vespers service. Hey. All right, and that's all I have for tonight.